Okay, it's time for episode 3. My name on the website is Chucky, not my real name. We've also got Jigsaw.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
I just got reminded that back in the day when I started this website, a lot of people would actually contact me asking if I'm the real Chucky. I'm guessing a lot of them must have been really young or teenagers. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure how they think that it's a real person out there somewhere. Or unless they think I'm Brad Dourif or something, but my name is Brad, but it's not Brad Dourif.
That's what you say, man.
Yeah. Hey, we also have the same star sign as well, so we might be the same person. Anyways, let's see what we've got for today's show. We've got Child's Play, the original Killer Doll movie. We've got The Brain, a bit of an oddball creature feature from the late 80s. A Dangerous Place, a martial arts flick with plenty of 90s high school drama. End of the Line, which is subway horror centering around a homicidal religious cult. And Halloween, which probably requires very little introduction. We're starting things off today with the 1988 Killer Doll movie Child's Play, about a serial killer named Charles Lee Ray, affectionately known as Chucky, and is gunned down one night by the police at a toy store. Just before he bites the dust, through an act of voodoo, Chucky manages to transfer his soul into a doll and vows revenge against the cop that shot him, and also against his partner in crime who ditched him at the scene. A young boy by the name of Andy receives the popular doll as a birthday gift, and as expected, people start dying. On the road to Chucky's revenge, he finds out from his voodoo witch doctor that the only way to get out of the doll is to transfer his soul into the child, and that becomes his main objective towards the movie's conclusion. Child's Play has a fairly ridiculous premise, and it's rather shocking how well it is acted and how seriously they managed to pull everything off. I think Brad Dourif's voice acting for the doll is about as good as it can get, and it's one of the definitive features of that iconic character. The evolution of the doll in the movie is great, and the amount of work that went into bringing that character to life is rather incredible. If you just watch any of the behind-the-scenes footage, you'll see what an exceptional production that it is. I love the tone to the film. I think it's broodingly dark and sinister. The musical score is also quite unique for it and helps things to move along rather nicely there.
Well, Child's Play is probably one of those movies that shouldn't be nearly as good as it ends up being. For the most part, the plot takes itself pretty seriously, and generally speaking, I think pretty much from beginning to end, the movie is a pretty exciting, pretty good movie. To be honest, I don't have many complaints about the movie. I think, most of the performances are fantastic. Of course, Brad Dourif's voice acting is amazing. Most of the death scenes are, if not, great, at least they're decent. So, I'm not sure, it's one of those movies where, I've seen it since I was a kid, I've seen it so many times, I'm sure you have too, that I can't think of much I have issue with.
Yeah, I remember when the movie came out on DVD. Oh, and just before I go into this very small story, I think it's worth mentioning that this is obviously my all-time favorite film. But back when DVD was just a very new thing, I actually bought a copy of it on DVD before I even had a DVD player. So I had the DVD. And this is back when DVD players were really expensive, very new. It's kind of like back when VHS was new. It was really expensive to not just get a VHS player, but if you remember, or you probably don't remember, but
I do not.
back when VHS was new, to buy a new copy of a movie, you'd have to spend up to near $100. So, and I remember a promotional ad for Child's Play where Chucky's introducing the film Child's Play on VHS, and he's like, you can get it for only, I think it was like $70.
Oh boy.
That's kind of like how expensive it was back then. But with DVD, I did buy the DVD before I had a DVD player, and once I finally got something to play it with, which I believe was a PlayStation 2 when the PlayStation 2 came out, and I was able to use that as my DVD player, I pretty much watched it every single day for at least a few weeks.
That is some dedication.
I think a part of that is because I'm so used to watching it on VHS, suddenly on DVD, the picture quality is so much better. And of course, when you move to Blu-ray, it even jumps up again there. Yeah, for a lot of my favourite movies, seeing them for the first time on DVD, it was a really great experience to just watch over and over again. Just you don't have to worry about all the fuzziness and all the problems that come with watching a VHS. Yeah, so I watched it. I've watched it. I wouldn't even be able to tell you how many times, but certainly over 100 times.
Now, did you actually happen to catch this when it came out in theaters?
No. Well, I was born in 1984, so
okay.
I'm not that old.
My mistake.
Yeah.
I just assumed you were a 70s kid. That's okay.
No. So I was born in 84, so I would have been about 4 or 5 years old by the time that was in cinemas. I did watch the movie at quite a young age. I watched it when I was about 6 or 7 on VHS. So I certainly watched this before watching many other horror movies, and that's a part of the reason why it probably maintains its position as my number one favorite film. It's just you tend to stick to those films that you fell in love with for the first time.
A movie like this, Child's Play, is such a I'm assuming that if you're listening, you've probably seen the movie. It's probably one of the more popular horror movies out there. It's such a well-known movie. Trying to dissect it is, in my opinion, somewhat difficult.
The first scene, the scene where he first comes to life on screen, where the mum discovers the doll doesn't have any batteries and threatens to throw him in the fire.
That is a fantastic scene. That's one thing I really appreciate about this movie. It's like you said, it's a somewhat ludicrous premise, but there are very, very suspenseful and tense scenes in this movie, and that has to be one of the top ones. I remember seeing that when I was a kid, just the very image of seeing the batteries fall out of the box, that's a stab through the heart. That's such a great scene. It's not, it's a simple scene, but it's so fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's the combination of the voice, obviously, the unexpected foul language of the actual doll itself, just out of nowhere, just, calling her a slut and don't fuck with me, that type of thing.
Put me down, you bitch!
Yeah, so the combination of that and I think the detail that they went into to actually bring the doll to life with, all the facial expressions that it can make.
It looked pretty good, especially for something from the late 80s.
Yeah, I mean, you compare it to, and I haven't seen some of these other films for a long time, but something like Dolly Dearest. There was another one I think called Pinocchio's Revenge, which I used to watch a couple of times back in the 90s.
Yeah, that movie has a slightly different feel to it, but I actually would say Pinocchio's Revenge is also a pretty good movie, but it definitely doesn't compare to Child's Play.
Just in terms of comparing the doll from Child's Play to any of these other dolls or toys in other movies, you can see the difference in terms of the detail.
I'll say one scene that always stuck with me when it came to Child's Play was in which Andy is locked up in the institution, and he sees Chucky coming for him from outside the window. When I was a kid, because like I said at a young age, that scene always freaked me out, because the kid can't do anything. He's locked in his room. He sees a guy coming for him and is basically screwed. So that when it comes to that scene, is one of the ones that sticks out of my mind when the most been thinking about this one, because that's a very suspenseful scene and just had a great feel to it.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that. Once again, this is more going into the detail of the doll itself, but how it actually transitions from being a toy to an actual, almost human.
Yes.
It gets the receding hairline, almost gets like a unibrow type thing going on, or at least hairier eyebrows. That level of detail, which doesn't really follow into any of the sequels, which is one small thing that I miss in the sequels, because it actually does visibly show you that he is becoming more human, or that he is aging, whereas in the other films you just kind of see, okay, he's starting to bleed, and that makes him more human.
Yeah, I can imagine it's probably somewhat difficult to keep that effect going.
Yeah, probably takes a lot more effort and time, I guess more money.
Yeah, I suspect that most people probably wouldn't even necessarily notice that much.
Well, yeah, I mean, you definitely notice it when you watch the behind the scenes.
Yes.
Especially for someone like me who actually has seen the movie so many times, and you can just pluck out every single detail in the movie. Maybe if you've watched it once or twice, you don't notice it as much as someone who's watched it 100 times. I also think with the ending, just how many times it seems like, okay, they've finally killed him, and he keeps coming back. They shoot him, they burn him, and even after he's been completely destroyed, he still keeps coming back.
It is an impressive display of perseverance.
Because it is my all-time favorite movie, I guess this goes without saying, but I think the last 10 seconds of the movie, where it's really dark and you just see the doll's head kind of just sitting there, and even then you're still kind of wondering, is he going to pop up again or do something? It's just a really good dark way to end that movie.
That's something I also like about this movie, the fact that, it's able to keep a very, very serious tone. With the mother worrying about whether or not a child's going crazy, and serial killer, within close, contact with this kid for most of the movie. In a way, it's a very dark movie, and I suspect if you just, see the poster, a doll that kills people, you might think, maybe that might just be a stupid movie, but honestly, the movie, it's done in a really, really good way.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot else that I can say about it, because to me, everything about it is great.
Well, I will say, this is just, this might show my ignorance more than anything, but it only took this last time when I watched the movie to realize that, what's the guy's name, Chris Sarandon, who was the police detective, was also in Fright Night. Fright Night's probably one of my favorite vampire movies, so the fact that I'd seen both movies so many times, and then I finally connect, hey, that's the same guy from Fright Night. That was a sort of a kick myself in the face type moment.
Yeah, and Fright Night's also directed by the same person, yes. Tom Holland.
Which is something I also didn't know until I had just recently seen Child's Play. So there's some things that just went right over my head. Another scene that always stuck with me in Child's Play was the voodoo scene, which I always, when I saw the movie when I was a kid, it's like, I was a bit confused, like, what's going on here, but I also have appreciated just how violent, it might not even be on screen, but just how violent that whole sequence is when he's torturing forget the guy's name, but sure you know who I'm talking about.
John Bishop,
yes,
that's his name. But yes. They don't actually say his name in the movie, but if you freeze frame at some point...
I'm sure you have freeze framed it.
You can see his name on one of the police reports, yeah. That scene, it's basically a torture scene with a little doll.
Because I always like the idea of Chucky having to get so far away from where he's supposed to be. And he's just a doll just trying to pretend to be a toy left behind and traveling a city bus just to get to this guy. Going from a human being who can drive to being so dependent on people not noticing you. That's you can sort of tell why you're so angry.
I guess one thing about the movie that kind of it's not so much about the movie, it's about people's perception of the doll, where you come across these people who are like, well, it's a doll, just kick it across the room, what's so scary about it? With anything, I think there's always advantages and disadvantages to being big, small, whatever you are, and it doesn't quite explain, I guess, just how strong or tough he is. Where, I mean, we can look at him and say, yeah, it's easy enough to kick him across the room, but I'm guessing he has more strength than people realize. He's clearly tougher than people realize because it's very hard to kill him. So I don't really like it when people bring up, just kick him for a field goal.
I'll be honest, I've never actually thought about that before.
Oh, well, I mean, it's something I see all the time. And I'm sure I came across that again recently at some point. Yeah, anyone who doesn't really like the film, that's what they say about it, so...
It just hit me that I actually have a difficult time. I don't think if I've actually spoken to anybody who dislikes Child's Play. It seems to me it's just one of those movies... it's not quite on the same level as a movie like A Nightmare on Elm Street or The Evil Dead, but to a lot of people, I generally almost only hear positive things about this movie. So... I can't imagine somebody who actively dislikes it exactly what the point of view is, which might just be my ignorance, but there you go.
Yeah, so as I was saying, my all-time favorite film. Love the character. I think it's a movie that far exceeds anyone's expectation of what that premise is. It has no right to be as good as it actually is. Dark, scary, good theme music. My score is obviously a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think Child's Play does pretty much everything right. No, at the same time, I don't quite love it as much as Chucky does. But it's a really good movie. It's a very classic 80s movie. I don't have any necessary complaints about it. It's just that the movie doesn't necessarily blow me away as much as it might other people. That said, the movie is pretty dang good. It doesn't really waste any time. It's a very action-packed movie. Very, a lot of great scenes, especially, with Chucky in the vehicle with a police detective. He's just stabbing him through the seat. It's a fantastically suspenseful scene. And it's just a movie that I've seen quite a few times, and it's always an enjoyable experience. I always have a lot of fun with it. So I would give Child's Play probably an 8.5 out of 10, which is still a pretty high rating, not quite as good as a 10 out of 10, but 8.5 is no slouch. It's a really good movie, and I'd certainly recommend it if, for some reason, you've not seen it yet.
It's better than A Nightmare on Elm Street and Evil Dead.
Okay. No, but that's okay. I'll just say this, and then we can move on to the next movie. It is better than The Evil Dead. It's not better than Nightmare on Elm Street. And we can have a fight over that later.
Agree to disagree.
Next up, we have the 1988 movie The Brain. It's a very interesting movie. There's a sort of self-help TV personality who is trying to take control of his audience with the help of an alien organism shaped like a brain, with massive telekinetic powers, trying to take over the audience to... I'm not even sure what the point of it was, to be honest, but just trying to take over the audience, and those who don't receive the brainwaves properly, for whatever reason, tend to have psychedelic and hallucinogenic breakdowns. There's some really strange things in this movie. This one high school student is sent to this clinic, and through the course of his experience, he finds out about the existence of this alien organism, and then tries to get people in his town to wake up to the growing power. But really, he can only find one person who believes him. And the movie from that point on is basically these two teens trying to fight against the whole town. Because by this point, the whole town is more or less under the influence of the brain. And very invasion of the body snatchers-like, actually. That's the basic premise of this movie. Certainly an often entertaining movie. It's really all over the place. There's slasher aspects to the movie in which some of these individuals sort of go crazy and kill people they've known all their lives. There's some really trippy psychedelic parts. The opening of the movie, when I saw the opening of the movie, I was just amazed because it was so out of the world. I don't know, the movie can be quite boring at times, especially once you get past, I don't know, like maybe the 30-minute mark, when it's just the two kids hiding in the school for 25 minutes. And I'm not overly satisfied with much of the conclusion, but I would say on the surface it's a very entertaining movie. It's just not a particularly great movie.
Yeah, I thought for me it was a fairly underwhelming experience for me. The story's got some okay potential there. The brain itself, while when it is on screen, it's one of those goofy type of creatures that you kind of either laugh at, yes, or you just find amusing because of how silly it looks. But in the grand scheme of things, when you ever see it on the screen and it's killing someone, it's really just kind of flapping its mouth while making some sort of growling, chewing noise. And so the brain itself didn't do as much for me as it probably could have. As you were saying, some of the characters, or at least at times in the movie, the characters are kind of boring. I think, is it David Gale who plays the scientist or the doctor?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
He, even though his character's somewhat interesting. It feels like a much cheaper version of a similar character that he played in Reanimator, which I believe was also another character who was kind of fascinated with the brain.
I would say, not to... the one thing I wish... Well, there's a lot of things I wish about this movie. I wish we got more backstory on that guy. Because he's just this TV personality, spiritual guy, but we don't really know much about him. And we never really find out much about him. And that's something the movie might have been, could have done to give us just a little more, meat.
And as you were saying earlier, the conclusion to the movie, I think that could have been a lot better. The way they defeat the brain, the special effects on it just, I don't know, it just didn't seem... I don't want to use the term realistic in a movie like this, but kind of sparks and electrocutes or explodes. It's kind of weird. It gets destroyed in a couple of different types of ways all at the same time. I don't know how to explain that.
Out of interest, have you seen this movie before?
I did try and watch it once, actually. I think a couple of months ago, and I only got a few minutes in. It was actually because I was quite tired at the time, so I kind of fell asleep straight away. Not so much anything to do with the movie.
Because I'll be honest, I would say the opening of the movie is probably one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, it definitely has a decent opening. And the movie does have its moments, especially when either the brain's on the screen
or that woman is undressing on the TV. But yeah.
Or some of those scenes, or, well, one in particular where the lady had the chainsaw.
There was a pretty decent decapitation. Well, it wasn't amazing, but there was a decapitation in the movie I thought was, pretty decent. Mainly because I'm a slasher guy. So during the time they moved more toward that area, I was a little happier.
Yeah. Well, I think actually there's 2 decapitations.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised.
There was the one with the axe, and then what does the other guy just punches his head off? Or, I can't remember, but 2 people get their heads knocked off.
No, I'll say as bad as the brain log, I was okay with most of the special effects. They weren't great, but for a somewhat lower budget movie from the late '80s, I thought they did somewhat okay for themselves.
Yeah, I'm definitely not complaining too much about the actual effects. I just think I don't know. I just expected it to look a little different when they defeat the brain.
Yeah, I just have wondered what did you expect? I'm going into this one.
Probably something a little more gooey, gory. But yeah, and another thing, that there are certain times during the movie where I don't know if it feels like they've just chopped or edited a scene. Like, they've filmed one part and then another part later and then added in. Like, that one scene where the woman goes outside to ask her husband to come in and watch the show.
Yeah.
When he says no, it doesn't sound like that was recorded at the same time as her asking him the question. So it just feels a bit odd there. And going back earlier at the start of the movie, where they're having the meeting with that boy and his parents, recommending they go see this doctor guy, there is a part where they all stand up and he puts the glue on the chair, yes. And then they all just sit back down. It's kind of like, why did everyone stand up in the first place? It just seemed like they did that just so they could actually have that scene of putting glue on the chair, but it didn't really make any sense for them to stand and then just sit back down 10 seconds later.
Yeah, there were some awkward parts of the movie. Well, I suspect some might argue a lot of the movie is awkward. Yeah, you can definitely tell there's some type of story going on behind the scenes.
The one woman who appears naked in multiple parts of the movie, as I was watching the movie, and my wife was kind of in and out watching the movie along with me, the second time she pops up towards the end, naked again, she mentioned that she had some sort of 5 o'clock shadow mustache, and as soon as she said that, I couldn't stop thinking about that any time she was talking, so that didn't really help either. Usually I want to, if a naked chick's on the screen, that's a good thing, but now saying, hey, she had a mustache, what? Not much of one.
I can imagine that would sort of ruin the vibe for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, when it comes to this movie, this was on a list of movies I've wanted to see for quite some time, and off the top of my head, I don't honestly remember why I put it on that list. I suspect probably because it was an 80s horror movie I haven't seen yet, and the 80s is one of my favorite decades of the genre. No, and when I finally watched it's an okay movie. It's not terrible. It's certainly entertaining, and while it can be slow at points, I think the story is interesting and it can somewhat keep you engaged. As bad as some of the more, I enjoyed most of the performances, and there was one character in the movie who had a very threatening feel to him, a big beard mustache type guy, and I did like that guy. Overall, I'll say the movie's entertaining, and while it's not necessarily a great movie, I would still rate it just slightly above average, so I'd probably give it a 7.5.
Yeah, for me it was a fairly underwhelming experience overall. Characters not too entertaining. Special effects were okay, but as I was saying, I did expect maybe a more gory or gooey type experience with a brain type creature that we had, and I thought they could have done a lot more with the actual. I don't know if you want to call it a creature, but I guess that's what I'm going to call it. I thought they could have done more with that. It is, at times, entertaining in that goofy kind of cheesy, low-budget way, but in the grand scheme of things, I thought it could have been a lot better, and I was expecting a little more out of it than what I got out of it. So I give it not such a great score of 4 out of 10.
Yeah, that's a much lower score than I anticipated.
Yeah, well, I was considering a 5, but then I go back and think about other movies that I've given a 5, and did I enjoy it on the same level as those? And I think, no.
Or maybe in 15 years when you revisit it, it'll come up to a 6.
Yeah, well, I mean, you never know. Maybe at some point I'll watch it again and I have a better time with it the next time. Up next is the mid-90s high school teen drama martial arts movie, A Dangerous Place, which is about a young high school student who, in a nutshell, just infiltrates a rival karate gang to discover the cause of his brother's death. The movie stars T.J. Roberts, who was the lead in a number of PM Entertainment films. He certainly had a great martial arts talent for his age, and I was actually a similar age during his time making these movies, so I quite envied his martial arts skill, I guess you could say. One of those type of actors that you kind of wish you could be yourself. So the movie it's more like a low-budget Karate Kid with a much darker tone, because it does involve some death. And there are actually quite a few fight scenes in the movie that are actually better than what I think you'd expect out of such a young talent and a low-budget production. Corey Feldman, he plays a lead bad boy, or, if you will, karate douchebag, and I think he plays it rather well. He's also got a evil sensei, which is kind of like a cheaper version of John Kreese from Karate Kid's Cobra Kai, and he's played by Marshall Teague. And any action fans may remember him from the movie Roadhouse, quite a popular movie with Patrick Swayze. He's the guy that used to fuck guys like Dalton in prison, if you've ever seen that movie.
I've actually never seen Roadhouse, man.
But yeah, no, he does an okay job here as well. Not quite as scary as he was in Roadhouse. It's got fairly generic background music for a 90s flick, but I do enjoy the original song that plays at the conclusion. While I certainly don't think it's everyone's cup of tea, I think some fans of cheap 90s action flicks, they could enjoy it, and especially if you were someone that went through high school during the 90s, such as myself, you can probably relate a little more to the high school drama aspect of the movie. So I understand you only just finished watching it about an hour ago, so let me know what you thought of it.
I thought it was a decently enjoyable movie. To anybody listening, I'm actually a big fan of The Karate Kid and The Karate Kid 2. I don't really go out of my way to watch many non-horror movies, but I do like The Karate Kid movies. And I really enjoyed how this one sort of took the basic story and then gave it, like Chucky says, a much darker feel. With, kid dealing with the death of his older brother, mother who is just, is terrified that her other son is going to die any time now because he's just disappearing in the middle of the night. We have this evil gang of kung fu guys committing crimes, getting chased by police on like a nightly basis. I'm not sure how they can get away with that every single night. That is a terribly inept police force in this place. Like every single night they chase these same guys.
Yeah.
I have to say I really enjoyed the police chase scenes because I don't mind action movies, and it's just a sort of a mindless piece of fun. Like Chucky says, there's some great kung fu scenes. I sort of wish, I forget, it's not really a championship, but the contest at the end of the movie, I wish that went a bit longer until before they were interrupted. But there was still quite a few good karate fight scenes. I don't have any major complaints that off the top of my head. This isn't one I really knew anything about before jumping into it, which is probably a good thing because movies like this generally may not appeal to me. But this one came out pretty okay. I will say one thing that did bother me, and it just hit me, was the really cheesy moments when the kid imagined he was seeing his older brother, with a glowing light around him, I guess speaking to him from beyond the grave, especially at the end of the movie, basically saying, no, don't do anything, let it go. It's just a bit much.
Well, as you were saying, the chase scenes in the movie, I thought the stunts they did were actually rather good,
Yes.
better than you'd probably expect from this type of movie, like with the car flips and everything. And also, like the scene where he gets to school that one morning and finds his brother hanging from the basketball hoop, that was actually a lot darker than you'd expect in this type of movie.
That was actually a really good scene. How there's a whole group of kids surrounding the door frame of the auditorium, and we it takes a few seconds for us to see what they see, and just this kid hanging there. And that was pretty good stuff, as good as apparent suicide can be.
Yeah. You were mentioning the contest at the end. There's one part where, and you kind of expect them to be cheaters, but they get like a black belt to wear a green belt,
Yes.
and he actually loses.
I can't believe nobody was watching that, closer though. Like, hey, maybe that guy's not the green belt guy.
Yeah, and and also their plan to actually kill someone in the match.
Because I was just reminded of the sweep the leg scene from the original Karate Kid. I'm thinking, well, this guy is so much more hardcore. He wants this kid to kill another kid, like in front of hundreds of kids.
Yeah,
Talk about a dick.
Another funny thing about it is that the sensei for the Lions team, the good team, played by a fairly popular actor, Marco. Now, I think the very first movie I ever saw him in was a movie called Taking Care of Business. You probably haven't seen it because it is I think it's a early 90s or maybe late 80s comedy with Jim Belushi, but there's a scene in the movie, or towards the end of the movie, he plays a businessman in this movie, and he's leaving a meeting at the end, and he says, or he copies what he heard someone say earlier in the movie, saying to this lady, "Nice titties," and that's all I can think about whenever I see him on the screen in this movie.
I will say, I sort of appreciate how, the Lions are the good team, and the Scorpions are the bad team. That's very clear-cut ways we see animals.
And I guess another thing about it is that the high school, at least towards the end, you see a lot of what the high school looks like on the outside. It's actually not a fairly green looking place, and it actually does remind me a lot of my high school, at least in some aspects, because at times during the year it gets rather dry and the grass isn't very green, and it just a lot of similarities to places that I grew up in. I'm not sure where in the US it was filmed.
Yeah, that scene where it looks like it was filmed in Los Angeles, California. That scene where the main kid, where Ethan and that black kid get jumped. It's like a very desolate location, And I thought that gave sort of an additional flavor to the movie. It's just not some generic suburban location. It's almost in some places like almost a desert. So I don't know. It didn't change much in the movie, but I sort of did like that. I will say the principal has no idea what the hell he's doing. I felt bad for the guy. I mean, I felt bad for the guy, but he does not know how to deal with the situation at all. That once you can just go back to class. Oh, that's what broke me up.
And then when he says, yes, I'll go back to class, he's kind of like, oh, okay, I think that'd be a really good idea.
Yeah, I don't know that actor, but I did enjoy that. There was one other thing I really liked. I really did like. He might have been a cheaper version of the Kreese from Karate Kid, but I thought Marshall Teague did a really decent job with his performance. Some really brutal, take no prisoners mentality, especially that scene in his dojo where he's just tells one of his kids, "Hey, just keep hitting me," and he's just standing there not doing anything. That it doesn't mean much, but it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, and then after that, as he's leaving the dojo, he's wearing these very 90s pants.
Speaking of which, what class was that guy teaching? Was it like history?
I don't recall.
Yeah, because when he first appears in the movie, he just looks like he's some teacher, and then you later find out he's the leader of the dojo, and it just struck me as odd that given this guy's mentality outside of school, they would give him a teaching job. Like, he seemed like an okay teacher. He was pretty okay with students, but it just sort of struck me as an interesting side job.
And then there's that one scene where they're having a fight at lunchtime, and he literally holds back the other teachers like, nah, let's watch this, rather than break it up.
I can't believe the other teacher, actually listened. That's a pretty
she didn't so much listen, but because he did kind of hold her and say, no, let him fight.
I did enjoy that scene. That's a pretty good fight scene. And I later enjoyed how the guy sort of mocked him. Hey, that was a pathetic performance. You let him drag you into the fight, and you just suck.
Yeah, you let a little guy beat you. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's a movie that relates a lot to me, just because I grew up in the exact same time period, and as you're growing up, you wish you could kick as much ass as this kid does.
Has this kid been in many other movies? Is he still doing stuff?
He's not really in anything recently. I believe he did at least 4 or 5 different movies, all from the same company. So I believe they, signed him to do a certain amount of movies all in one go, because they all kind of happened within the span of 2-3 years. So they just really pumped them out. And I believe they were anticipating that he would become some sort of star, which you can see because, he does have some good talent, not necessarily a great acting talent, but a good on-screen martial arts fighting talent. I do have some of his other movies, so as I said, I grew up during the same time or same age that he was, roughly. The first movie, I think it was the first movie he did, called Magic Kid, which is also known as Ninja Dragons in some countries. That particular movie is kind of like Home Alone, but with the kid being, has martial arts skill and just kicks bad guys' asses. So it is fun, but also in a goofy kind of way. It is quite a comedic movie, and I quite enjoy that one as well. But I still think this is a better movie just because it's darker. It's a movie that I relate to quite well, just because I grew up in the same time period. It's reminiscent of a lot of cheap action movies that I like to watch during that time, and I really wanted to, be this kid. I never quite got to the point where I started doing karate or anything, but...
You were close.
I remember asking my parents if I could, and... I was in an area where it just wasn't a popular thing, especially back then. I lived in a very rural area where there's not much to do. I'd have to travel far if I wanted to do something like that. Overall, I rather enjoy the movie. I give it an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I have something to say prior to talking specifically about this movie. Since I'm mainly a horror guy, I don't watch that many non-horror movies. I know that Chucky was surprised that I gave Bloodsport such a high rating last episode. And I think that's because when I watch a non-horror movie, I'm not watching with nearly as critical an eye. I'm not, going into the movie thinking, well, I'm going to have to write a review on this later. I might as well, watch really carefully. Because of that, I really enjoyed A Dangerous Place. I did think it was amazing, but when I was watching it, I never really felt bored during any scenes. Aside from the dad brother popping up every now and again, I mostly enjoyed it. I enjoyed the crime sequences, and it had a very dark feel, which again I enjoyed. I would probably give this movie an 8 out of 10. It's not as good as other action movies, but for its time and for being a somewhat obscure movie, I don't hear many people talking about this one whatsoever. I think it's pretty decent, and I can see myself watching it again pretty easily.
Yeah. You said that Karate Kid 1 and 2 are movies that you quite enjoy. How does it fare compared to those?
I would say Karate Kid, and a lot of this is because since I grew up watching those movies, it is more of a nostalgic feeling. Because there were some things I liked more about this movie, but since I grew up with Karate Kid's probably like a 9.5, and the second Karate Kid, probably somewhere like a 8.5, 9. Both I think are really decent movies, and I also enjoyed, and I can already hear some people cringing, the 1994 The Next Karate Kid with Hilary Swank. I actually enjoyed that one, so that sort of shows my taste in non-horror, much like my taste in horror, sort of all over the place, which we may or may not find out more as we continue talking about these types of movies. Next up, though, we have somewhat well-known movie for its budget, the Canadian 2007 flick End of the Line. Very simple plot in a way. There's a nurse who gets on the subway train, and shortly thereafter, a whole bunch of people, part of a religiously fanatic cult, something like Voice of the Eternal Hope or something like that, they start killing pretty much anybody they run across who is not a member of the cult. So, sort of like a murderous rampage type thing. They're sort of singing their hymns, walking slowly, just killing whoever they come across. So the woman, with a few other characters she runs into, sort of band together and try to survive and get out of the subway to see if they can have any, hope of getting through the night. And it's a very simple plot. There's not a whole lot of characters. I mean, there's a few back characters, but the main group of 5-6 people is really all that matters. And you can definitely tell when watching the movie it wasn't a particularly high budget, but at the same time I think a lot of things really work in this movie. There's some scenes which are legitimately creepy, and there's some scenes which I don't usually get scared after during horror movies anymore, but there were a few scenes that made me jump, so they did a good job at that.
Yeah, I think the jump scares in this movie may be the best jump scares ever.
Yeah, that opening scene with the giant, and then she looked at that scene. It came out of. I was expecting something, but I wasn't expecting it that quickly. So.
I actually have that scene uploaded on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. And someone recently did recommend. I think they recommended a good subway horror type movie. So I showed them that scene, and their response was, "Holy shit!"
I can imagine that would be the most common response.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, especially towards the beginning, there's actually 2 or 3 right in the first 5-10 minutes, and they all work incredibly well. There's that one scene where the Asian chick is waiting for the subway, and there's this other guy who's just kind of got his back turned and just somehow slowly keeps getting closer and closer, and that was a really cool scene as well. The scary thing about this is just how real it could be. You could just be on a train or whatever, and then you could be talking to one of these people they're just very normal, and then two minutes later they get a call and they start trying to kill the shit out of you.
and they're going to sing to you while doing it. So.
Yeah, and they're doing it for a reason that they think is beneficial to you.
Yeah, it was so creepy, especially the main woman. She was such, I don't know who that is. I don't know any of these actors in this movie, but that woman was such a great actress. I really enjoyed her.
Yeah, so the acting talent, I mean, clearly they're quite unknown actors, somewhat amateurish, but I think that only helps in this particular type of movie with how real it could have been.
Yeah, and I think past a certain point, some of the more awkward scenes don't really happen as much. So once the action really kicks in, from that point on, it's pretty much a la Bloodshot type thing. Aside from like a brief reprise, somewhat close to the conclusion.
And even though sometimes when a movie leaves you with so many questions, that may be a bad thing at times, for this movie, I think it actually works rather well. There's so many questions about the movie, like, were the monsters real? What's the deal with those muffins? Yeah, there's so many things or discussion points about the movie where you're never really going to know for certain, and you can kind of draw up your own conclusions.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because now I've seen this movie once before, like 5-6 years ago. It's been a long time. So when I watched it just a few days ago, I had forgotten quite a bit of it. So when I was looking this movie up online, like half the plot started with because of muffins. So when I was watching the movie, it never really made anything clear about whether or not the muffins had anything to do with it, aside from that the would-be rapist guy, oh, the muffins are pretty addictive, aren't they? I mean, I thought it was a really interesting, it could very well be they are hallucinogenic muffins, and that's why they're seeing these, monsters, which, if you're watching the movie, it sort of makes sense. But at the same time, it could just be there really are demons out there, I really hope it's not that one, because it sort of gives a religious cult a good reason for doing what they're doing. And I want to try to avoid that.
Depending on how much attention was paid to the movie, you may or may not have noticed at the beginning of the movie, shortly after that scene we mentioned where she holds up the picture in the subway, clearly that is some sort of nightmare or daydream or whatever she had. Because when you see her in the shower, she's actually got this huge scar on her shoulder. And I believe at some point in the actual movie, she does get some sort of injury there. So I guess that scene is telling us that something did happen.
Yeah, I did not notice that. I'm just, I'm sitting here. Oh, hey, that's interesting.
Yeah, like it doesn't make it too apparent that scene is actually what happens after the movie. You kind of watch it thinking, okay, the movie's starting here, she's having some sort of nightmare, she has a shower, then she goes to work. But I think the scene where she's at work is actually where the movie really begins, or at least or the subway scene with the Asian chick.
Yes.
Yeah, so the shower scene is actually what happens after the conclusion. I had a look at what the movie's budget was, and on IMDb it gives an estimate of about $200,000 Canadian, which is extremely low, and I think they really overachieved in a number of areas. They definitely used the subway setting really well, and the monsters themselves, which you tend to see, monsters, creatures, whatever you want to call them, demons, towards the end, they actually look really good too. So I'm not sure how they pulled it all off.
I think it helps that they were not overused. They pretty much didn't appear, really until the last maybe 15 minutes, and they weren't used that often, which I thought really upped their creepy feel.
Yeah, so, I mean, it could be that all of this actually did happen, or maybe she ate some muffins and then she fell over and hurt her shoulder somewhere, and that's how she got the scar. Who knows? There's just so many different ways you could go with it.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention, not so much as a criticism of the movie, but there's a scene in which one of these religious individuals wants to get his rocks off with unwilling women before he has to save their souls by murdering them. And, this other religious woman finds him doing this, and he blames the woman for trying to possess him and make him do this. Just blaming the woman for his actions toward her. And, of course, the religious group believes the guy because he's he's like a secretary of the organization. He had a very high position in the religious cult. And, of course, the guy got off scot-free, and they ended up not necessarily doing great things to the woman. So I just thought that scene sort of stuck with me. Very interesting look at some religious hypocrisy.
And one other thing to mention is, well, throughout the movie we hear the religious cult members singing that little tune, and they actually have that as a properly recorded version at the end credits, and I think following the movie, it's actually really creepy, that tune. It doesn't really have any music, it's just, I think it's a great ending as well.
Yeah, I will say just one more thing. I'm not sure if I touch on this much, but if you're a slasher guy, there's a lot of really good gory scenes in this movie, and you might think, well, the budget being what it is, it might not be that great, but there's some really decent things here. And if you're just a slasher fan alone, if you're not interested in the religious aspects, I would still give this a log. Now, out of interest, when did you first run into this one?
I actually rented it out from the video store back when video stores were still a thing, pretty much at the time it got released. So I would say somewhere around 2007, 2008, when it first got released. That's when I first watched it, and quite enjoyed it. Enjoyed it enough to say, I'll watch that again, and the next time I watched it again, enjoyed it even more. And so yeah, I've watched it probably at least 4 or 5 times, at least.
I think it's interesting. This movie's not, necessarily obscure. Thousands of people have, seen this one. I don't hear it spoken about very often, though. Usually when I do, it's in the positive light. But when it comes to, post-2000 horror movies, I generally don't see Under the Line pop up. And I think it's really a shame, because this is easily probably one of the, at least in the top 50 horror movies of 2000 through 2010, I would suspect. I mean, it's such a tightly constructed, simple plot, but fantastically suspenseful scenes, and jump scares are fantastic, and it just has such a creepy vibe to it. Because, like Chucky said, nothing in this movie, well, aside from hopefully the demons, but most of the movie, there's nothing too outside the realm of possibility. And I think that sense of realism brings a very morbid vibe to the movie. Yeah, so Under the Line is a pretty good movie. I would certainly recommend it, and I would not be dissuaded by the budget. This is one I would give an 8 out of 10. It's a really fantastic movie, and I would certainly say it's one that you should probably see.
Yeah, I enjoyed it even more. I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's one of the best jump scare movies as well. Even though it doesn't tend to have jump scares all the way throughout, it starts off with quite a few of them, and they're quite cleverly constructed. There's a lot of creepy scenes. I mean, religious cults in general just kind of make my skin crawl. I guess the aspect of them killing people thinking it's a good thing, there's just something really creepy about that. The movie gives a lot of possible scenarios and leaves you with some questions that make for really good discussions, and it does have that really creepy tune towards the end of the movie as well, which just caps everything off nicely. And it's a movie that, for such a low budget, it just excels way more than it really should have. And it's a shame that this director, I think this is the last movie that he ever did, so I'm not sure why he's never done another movie since. I mean, he did a fantastic job with this one. The final movie we have for today is the 1978 slasher classic Halloween. One night, a young boy named Michael Myers, not to be confused with the actor of the same name, he kills his sister and is locked away for many years in I think it's an insane asylum?
Yes.
So later on, as an adult, he escapes the facility just before Halloween and returns to his hometown to kill again. So even though it's not the first slasher movie ever made, it's generally regarded as the grandfather of slasher movies, I guess, as it's usually linked to or responsible for the wave of all the slasher movies that followed shortly after. It's a movie that has a fair amount of deaths, but is really more suspenseful than your typical slasher movie, and it's a very well-made film. The mask they modified or created for the movie really stands out well, and gives the character of Michael Myers a great emotionless tone. The theme music is good, though it does get a little repetitive after a while for my taste. The acting overall is decent. Jamie Lee Curtis, her performance towards the end is really good. And of course Donald Pleasence, he does fine in his role as well, as Michael's doctor. Though there's not too many noteworthy characters outside of those two. And I didn't necessarily care too much about who lived or who died outside of those two. So normally for a slasher movie, I don't think the lack of characters that I care about would be as much of an issue for me if it was for a movie that focused a lot more on gore and violence. But because Halloween goes for more suspense, I think the lack of care that I had for most of those characters does in some small way hurt my overall enjoyment of the movie. But yeah, I think it's a very good film. For me personally, it doesn't quite stand out among most other good movies of its time and genre, though.
I would say Halloween is probably the perfect horror movie. And that's pretty much all I would need to say, because this, not only is it a classic insofar as slashers are concerned, even if you don't know a thing about horror movies, you probably know about Halloween. It's in that very high echelon of horror, where pretty much everybody knows about it. Few movies, maybe The Exorcist, few movies can reach that point. Halloween is, in my opinion, pretty flawless. I don't have a single problem with the movie. Both the original version and then the version that has a few extra scenes in it. It doesn't matter. I think the movie is pretty fantastic. I enjoy most of the characters. I enjoy most of the performances. The theme, I think, is probably one of the best themes in the history of horror movies. The suspense the movie has is just off the charts. I don't know, it's one of those movies where I would have to struggle to give this one any type of negative outlook. I mean, I've said before, I grew up in the, 90s, early 2000s. When I was a kid, I saw this movie on TV all the time. And it's probably a combination of that nostalgic value mixed with the fact that despite the somewhat low budget for this time period, Halloween virtually blows every other movie out of the water. In my opinion, it's a pretty fantastic movie. And it's one of those movies that if for some reason you've not seen, if you don't think you'd like it, 70s horror, I would definitely recommend you see this one. And I would also ask you what the hell you're doing for having not seen it yet. Yeah, I guess, let me just I think Halloween, in my opinion, is one of the best horror movies ever made. You have movies like Child's Play that are great. You have movies like Nightmare on Elm Street. Halloween is, some people like The Shining, some people like The Exorcist. A few people think Poltergeist, but when it comes to best horror movie ever made, without a doubt, I would choose Halloween.
Yeah, no, it is a very good movie. I guess I've just seen, I only saw this movie once I was in my teen years, so kind of in the mid to late 90s. And I'd seen so many other slasher movies before it, so because it wasn't one of the earlier horror movies that I watched, it doesn't quite stick with me as much as some of those others do. And while I'm sure a lot of people genuinely do feel it is a perfect movie, and in your case that's true, I think some horror fans also let a movie's reputation help shape their opinion of a movie. So if it's generally regarded as a 10 out of 10 best slasher movie ever, or whatever you want to call it, I think some people just take that and then...
Yeah, they sort of run with it.
They're kind of influenced by that to enjoy it even more than maybe than they actually do. Yeah.
I would say I don't believe I would fall under that category, and I don't think you're saying I do. I'll just point out, I think the 1980 The Shining is a subpar movie. I think it's actually not necessarily a bad movie, but it's definitely not a great movie. And Exorcist, not a particularly great movie. Carrie, not a particularly great movie. So there's a lot of quote-unquote classic horror movies I just don't care for. So Halloween sort of transcends that. It's probably one of the few really, high-rated horror movies that I actually agree should be as highly rated as many people say it is.
There is something that kind of, I don't want to say it irks me, but it's something I question towards the beginning of the movie where Michael escapes and he drives off, and they give that kind of very loose explanation. Well, someone maybe gave him lessons. I'm thinking, what, did they let these people test drive cars or something? Or even if they instructed him on how to drive a car. I don't know for you, but the first time I ever drove a car, a manual car where you actually had to change gears, and I'm guessing that's what this is, it's not easy, even if you're told how to do it. Like, you stall the car so many times when you're just learning how to drive, and he just kind of slowly drives off like he's driven plenty of times before.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of this. I've heard that supposedly Michael Myers' intelligence level is moderately high, so anytime he would be transported from one facility to another, or pretty much anytime he was in a vehicle, he would sort of be absorbent of how, to operate a vehicle. And I don't know if I buy that, but there's one possible solution. The other thing that comes to mind is the personification of Michael being evil. And, if, and a few characters have said, if Michael is this personification of evil, it probably doesn't matter if he knows how to drive a stick shift or not.
Well, we may have to ask Bill Gates what his experience was with driving stick shift, yeah.
I would say that's a reference that actually just went over my head.
Oh, well, you just said his intelligence level was probably a lot higher, and I'm guessing Bill Gates is too, so I don't know why his name came up, I just threw it out there.
Yeah, I would say to me, I can understand why that might, not necessarily annoy, but, just stand out to some people. I don't think that ever really bothered me, even once I started driving. I don't think the fact that Michael sort of jumped right into it really did, left much of a negative impression on me. Because, by that point, I'd seen this movie God knows how many times.
Yeah, I just think for me, with a slasher movie, I guess I just prefer to see more violence than what we kind of see in this movie. Even though I do enjoy suspense movies, I think movies that use a lot more suspense, they tend to have a lot less replayability for me as well. After you've seen the movie a number of times, you know what's happening, so the suspense factor, it decreases over time. At least for me it does.
Yeah, I'll say at the same time, there are two scenes that always stick with me. One scene in which, after Laurie discovers the body of one of her friends, she's walking away from the room and we see Michael behind her. And the camera sort of shifts angles, and we know Michael's behind her, but then the camera shifts angles. Now we don't see Michael, and then he just pops up. I thought that was a fantastic use of cinematography right there. Then, toward the end of the movie, and this is probably one of the more famous scenes, in which Michael was stabbed with a sewing needle, hanger. It was a hanger. He just sits up, the music pops up, and in my opinion, when I see those two scenes, that's like A+ level ability right there.
Well, yeah, that scene was directed really well. I mean, even if you look, like, when she's hiding in the closet, yes, and you see the light peering in through those holes in the cupboard there. Yeah, that's a really good scene.
Admittedly, it is somewhat difficult for me to take a step back and try to use a critical eye on this one. Though, if I have any problem with this, maybe one be the lack of conclusion, or I guess real conclusion. Of course, we all know it, carries on into Halloween too. But as far as this movie is concerned, I can imagine some people might be annoyed with how the movie ends, even though I think it's pretty perfect. But the fact that, at least as far as this movie goes, Michael Myers is focused for no reason on some random teenage girl. And I know later movies try to explain that. But the fact that he focuses on just one individual, if you don't know any of the other movies, might seem a bit strange.
I guess it comes as I'm not going to say no surprise, but for me, the more I think about it, when I said, I'd prefer it to be more violent or gory or be more like a actual standard slasher movie, I was just thinking to myself what my favorite movie is in this series, and it's actually part 6, which I know a lot of people think is one of probably the crappier ones.
Yeah, top 3 worst ones in the series, probably.
But I think it's also one of the movies where he is the most menacing and he is the most violent, and no matter which version of it you watch, there's the theatrical version, and then there's also the producer's cut version. Both are, in my opinion, good. The theatrical one has this major massacre sequence in the last 15 minutes of the movie that I really enjoy. And I think Michael Myers is the scariest in that movie. The mask looks the best, and the violence it's about as violent as it is for a Halloween movie.
It's funny because, for me, You know that scene when she's looking outside her window, with Laurie Strode looking outside her window, to just sees Michael standing there. I'll be honest, that's all I need. Just a guy standing there silently. Of course I appreciate gory movies. I'm a big slasher fan, but some movies, if in my opinion, if the suspense is done perfectly, you don't really need that much gore, which I think Halloween is probably one of the best examples of.
I really wish if someone did a parody of that scene where she sees him outside the window, amongst the sheets that are on the line, and she sees him and then looks again, and then instead of him disappearing, I wish some movie would come along and do a parody where he's actually doing his laundry. But I don't know. Yeah, I just wish they'd do that. I think I saw somewhere, might have been on YouTube, the other scene where she sees him just next to the hedge and he takes a step behind it and disappears. I'm sure I've seen a YouTube video where they do that, and then she walks... I don't know if she walks around and sees him, or if they just show him literally hiding behind it, like, cowardly. I'd have to find that again, because, anytime they can make fun of, serious scenes, whether it's this movie or any movie, it's, if they do it cleverly enough, it's always fun.
Yeah, and one other thing I do touch on, and you touch on this a little, Donald Pleasence's character is, I think, a thoroughly enjoyable, potentially unhinged guy, and as the series progresses he becomes more and more unhinged. I always enjoy that scene where he's staked out at the Myers house and his kids come up. Oh hey, I dare you to go to the porch, and one of the kids gets to the porch and he's like, hey, get your ass off the porch, and his smile after he does that. And then a second later he's terrified when the sheriff comes back. That little sequence, it's probably one of the few a little more humorous scenes, but I always sort of like the humanization of Pleasence, Loomis's character, who is often seen as, one-track mind type guy.
The one scene where they are I think they're in the Myers house, and then just randomly out of nowhere, something smashes the window. Do we know what that was that smashed the window?
Off the top of my head, I do not.
Yeah, I never really paid too much attention to what it was, but I'm just wondering, did someone throw a rock or what? What caused that window to smash?
I also I really liked Laurie's character, the very sort of book smart but awkward teenage girl, even though she may not have looked like a teenager. I just really enjoyed her character. She has very normal concerns, like, oh my god, who do I ask to dance with me? And she's not, a complete goody two-shoes, because she also tries a little marijuana. Shows that she's at least interested in living the wild side. But I really enjoy her character. And having, three of the main characters, Michael, Loomis, and Laurie, all being good characters, I mean, that's already a really good combination.
Yeah, so for me, it is a very well-made film. I do enjoy it. I just don't enjoy it as much as some of the other great horror movies out there. Child's Play is better, obviously, in my opinion. Even A Nightmare on Elm Street I prefer over Halloween. So while I do enjoy the suspense of the movie, it's rather hard to maintain that with repeat viewings, just because you know what's going to happen, so the suspense just loses its value to me outside of the first time I watched it. Because when I did first watch it, I did really enjoy it, and I still enjoy it. It just doesn't stand out over the other good slasher movies that are out there. If the characters outside of Laurie and Dr. Loomis were more enjoyable to me, maybe that would have made a difference. I'm not sure. But overall, I give the movie an 8 out of 10. The music also is really good, just a little too repetitive after a while.
Yeah, and I think my opinion's probably somewhat clear. You can name some of your favorite horror movies, The Shining from 1980 with Jack Nicholson, The Exorcist, Jaws, The Thing, The Evil Dead, Child's Play, Nightmare on Elm Street. It doesn't matter, because Halloween is superior to all of them. Not to offend anybody listening, such as Chucky, but Halloween is, in my opinion, one of the perfect horror movies. Every time I've seen it, I've given it a consistent 10 out of 10. I have very few real problems with it. And it's, I think, one of the few cases in which a very well-received movie by a majority of people is actually a really decent movie. And I think it's a shame that while some newer Halloween movies, be it the Rob Zombie movies or even the 2018 Halloween movie, I think it's a shame that they sort of try to move away from what the original did so well, which was almost no gore and just was straight suspense. And it worked amazing in Halloween, and it's never really been captured again in most other movies I've seen. So I would give Halloween an easy 10 of 10. And I sort of suspect that very few movies would come close to rivaling exactly how I feel about Halloween. So before leaving, I did what you mentioned, one movie I saw in the last week, which, based on what I've seen online, very few people really know about. And this is really the type of movie that Chucky might be interested in, but any listeners may potentially be interested in. This is a very short movie from 1963, a black and white movie titled House of the Damned. Just an hour long, very small cast, and like I said, it's in black and white. I happened to catch this on TV in the last few days, and I had wanted to see it for quite some time, but I didn't actually expect it to be as good as it was. It's a very short, digestible movie, some legitimately creepy scenes, even for the time period. Some scenes that, even made me, like, oh hey, that's really well done. It's not a particularly well-known movie, and in fact, a lot of places don't even list the movie as a horror movie. They usually call it either like a mystery or suspense, which sort of blows my mind because it's obviously a horror movie, in my opinion. So if you're into more classic movies, maybe slightly more obscure movies, you might want to look into House of the Damned because you might be surprised, by how much you can enjoy it.
Yeah, you just know that with my superior editing skills, that I'm going to somehow change what you said into a discussion about House of the Dead, the Uwe Boll movie.
I've actually never seen House of the Dead, so I'll be okay with that.
I have a feeling that you won't like it.
I have a feeling I won't see it.
You may be forced to watch it at some point. If you're still listening, you managed to watch the whole show, you're over an hour into the show, you're still listening to us, don't be a little bitch. Go to the website, fightevil.com. That's FIGHT-EVIL.com. Go there, rate some movies that you've seen, talk on the forums, get involved.